Good morning from St James's Park in London. I'm joined here by Martin Hewitt. Martin, good morning to you. The chair of the National Police Chiefs Council, a former senior Metropolitan Police officer. Half an hour's worth of conversation ahead of us, Martin. We're going to walk down this way with St James's Park on our left, and quite a number of people out and about in London, which in so many ways enjoying half term and a pleasant, more than a pleasant change from the lockdowns that we've had, plural, over the last months and beyond. So much we could talk about. I'm going to start, ask if I may, with some thoughts relating to the absolutely tragic murder of Sarah Everard just recently, the murder by at the time a serving Metropolitan Police officer, which brings us into questions of potentially vetting, potentially violence against women and girls, and safety of that particular group, and potentially of wider legitimacy as well. So your thoughts on the despicable crime, and indeed on wider matters.
So yeah, I think you have to look at this as quite a defining moment for the service, particularly in terms of the trust and confidence, not only in what we do as a service, but quite frankly in all of us as individuals within the service, and obviously holding the powers that we do. I mean, what he did is obviously hideous and disgraceful and hurtful to every single person who works in the service. But we have got to respond quite rightly, and I think there's a couple of angles, which is what we're doing through the National Police Chiefs Council. We started to work up a response actually at the point where Sarah's murder happened, and then immediately after that it became apparent that it was a police officer who was the offender. Now, of course, at that stage, up until the sentencing, we didn't know all of the horrible details of what he did, but nonetheless we started working there. And for me there are a couple of angles. The first one is really how we improve collectively, the service improves our performance in dealing with those issues of violence against women and girls, and that takes you obviously into the territory around domestic abuse, the territory around sexual offending, but also importantly I think into those areas around what you might describe as lower level criminality, the kind of day-to-day harassment, intimidation that became very clear to all of us that many women from all ages, all parts of society deal with, quite frankly, on a day-to-day basis. Now, policing can't solve all of those issues, and I think there are deeper seated societal issues that we all need to ask ourselves about, but definitely where we need to improve, and we are working, we've got a lot of work going on to try and improve how we deal with those issues in the first instance. And a lot of that is about listening, quite frankly. I think often one of the challenges for us always is we immediately jump to what we think needs to be done. And I think in this case it's been really important to be actually hearing the experience of women, how their experience of interacting with the police, their experience of the criminal justice system, all of that needs to be dealt with, and there's lots that we are doing towards that. And we now have a national lead to coordinate that in the guise of Maggie Blythe, the Deputy Chief Constable, to pick up all of those issues. So that, if you like, is the outward facing, how we deliver. The inward point, of course, is that the hideous behaviour of that individual has brought into question how trusted we can all be as individuals who carry a warrant card, wear a uniform. And so that leads you into the work that's being done. So the other side of the work that we've started is looking at our whole process of vetting and how we make sure that the people that work in our organisations we are as sure about as we possibly can be. And of course, more broadly, professional standards. How do individual forces deal with officers who fall below the standard that we require? And it's really important that we're doing that. It's really important that we're doing that in a visible way so that people recognise that we are dealing with it. You know, we have to be realistic. If you look at UK policing, it's what, 150, 60,000 officers now, I guess, in total. And so there are going to be people in there who do not meet the standards, and we all understand that. The real challenge for us, and particularly for us as senior leaders, is how do you make sure we are dealing with those issues promptly, they're being identified so that members of staff or members of the public are confident to bring forward allegations about behaviour that they don't think is appropriate. So really important that we do that, then we deal with it properly, and we do that all openly. So I do think it is a defining moment, particularly in our relationship with women and girls, but it also, for me, fits with some other issues as well, and people will recognise and remember, you know, we go back to the summer of last year and what happened, and the international response after the murder of George Floyd by a police officer in America. And again, there we kicked off some work there, because again, for me, that fits to the same challenge for us, and the same defining challenge about our legitimacy as a service.
One of the things that struck me, so shortly after the murder of Sarah Everard,
Yeah.
I made a point of having a conversation with my own daughter about the violence, sometimes the fear that she has as a young woman, and
Yeah.
indeed I had conversations with others, and you know, as an increasingly elderly bloke, a white, you know, these challenges are not challenges that previously I had experienced, nor had I'll be perfectly honest, made much effort to go out and
Yep.
find out more about them.
Yep.
But these are
Real.
these are real. They're also challenges. Challenges is too mild a word, but challenges that face others in society beyond women. Women are of course approximately 50% of the population.
They are.
So that's a pretty substantial group.
It's
But
not
there
a minority group,
It's not
is
a
it? No.
minority group. There are other groups that themselves, perhaps, shall I say, trust the police less,
Yeah.
and whom efforts have been, continue to be made. More efforts perhaps could be made in reassuring that community,
Yeah.
those communities, of that legitimacy.
Yeah, I mean, those efforts are being made. You're quite right, though, and it's a really important point that it's not about, you know, I'm not going to sort of, it's not about me beating myself up because I'm a white male. That doesn't achieve anything. It really is that point, as you say, about understanding, about wanting to learn what life feels like for people who are in other groups, and it's actually quite hard to do that. You know, I said in a talk I gave the other day, you know, I've never been a minority. I've always been in the majority group, and someone put it to me, which I thought was the best way to describe, you know, what you talk about, what your daughter, and I've had the same conversation with my daughters, or I can talk to, you know, to friends and colleagues who are from minority groups, is there's very, very rarely a point where I go into an environment where I have to change the way I am to fit in, to change the way I am so that I don't get, you know, I don't get marginalised, and that's what we've got to start to understand. I think often we immediately start talking about, oh, we need to train people more. Actually, it's more about learning than training for me. It's about understanding why the world looks the way it looks. If you happen to be if you are a woman, or if you're a black man, or if you're a black woman, where you've got two potential kind of prejudices that some people will have in the way that they deal with you. So we've got to really understand that. We've got to really work with people from those communities to get that understanding, and I think that's sometimes where we haven't been quite as good as we could have been. You know, I have no concerns among the chief constables that the will and the determination there is to reduce any kind of prejudice that exists, to do what we can do for all of those communities, because the reason this is important is our style of policing, our traditional policing, is based around community support. It's about consensus, it's about working with communities, not policing communities, it's working with them. And you can only do that if all parts of your community are comfortable and confident to do that. So that's why this is defining, and it's a really important time for us to be able to demonstrate that we are listening, first off, and then that we are learning, and that we are, most importantly, practically doing things that change people's day-to-day experience. Because, as you say, and I've got an 18-year-old daughter, and it's quite unpleasant when you listen to some of how she perceives the way that people are looking at her, the way she feels insecure at times. That's not a good place for us to be. Now, let's be clear, police can't solve all the changes of society. These issues have existed forever, I suspect, but nonetheless it moves over time, and we can definitely influence and we can have an impact on how this is seen, and we as police leaders can have a voice in calling this out and challenging, and then of course, as I said at the beginning, doing the work that we need to do when someone does come forward and has the courage to come forward and make an allegation, that we effectively deal with that allegation.
Yes, now
because that starts to have an impact.
Legitimacy, and this is a part of the legitimacy challenge. The term, I think, isn't always as well understood as it might be, but legitimacy of policing amongst communities, whatever their backgrounds, their diversity and so on. The legitimacy is a part. There are two things for the APCC-NPCC summit: the Association of Police and Crime Commissioners, the National Police Chiefs Council here in the UK, the NPCC very broadly represents the most senior officers, the APCC very broadly is the organisation that speaks on behalf of those in governance, so police and crime commissioners, indeed. Now, the other elements, so legitimacy is one key element that this summit will be exploring, and the other, I understand, is on performance. So performance ties in some respects to things like vetting. It ties into funding. It's all very well to call on policing to do even better, but if the funds aren't increasing here in the UK, the number of police officers is increasing, albeit they are new recruits, and the more experienced officers are continue to retire and depart. So the performance side, how do you square that circle with an increase of police officers here in the UK, but less experienced police officers, and funding potentially not increasing as you would wish it?
So I guess the first important point to say is that the issue of performance for me is as much a part of our legitimacy as the fair treatment, which is what we've really been talking about so far. Because to be legitimate as a service, we've got to be useful to people. We've got to deal with the issue. How do you boil down what policing's all about? It's about making people safe, and it's about making people feel safe, if you really want to reduce it down. And so we've got to be doing the things that are dealing with those issues that are of most concern to members of the public. We are seen to be responding to those concerns, to responding to allegations, responding to calls for help, and then dealing with the criminals. So this is really critical, and that's why for the summit we've joined the two things together, because I don't think you can see them either individually. They are one and the same element of our legitimacy as a service. So we're walking now, probably as the Chancellor is speaking, or he certainly is speaking soon,
it's
with
the UK budget day.
So the UK spending review, the budget will be announced for the next 3 years, which is really positive that it's actually going to be a 3-year settlement, whereas over the last number of years it's been 1 year, which makes planning very difficult. So I don't know what's going to be
let me just, on that point, that is a significant change, actually.
It is.
That the planning horizon moves from 1 year to 3 years.
To 3 years. Really
Absolutely.
Important point, because it allows you to plan effectively. Now I don't obviously yet know the outcome of what the Chancellor is going to say, but all the indications I get are reasonably positive for policing, in sense of the funding that we require, particularly the funding that is required to continue the growth in officers, So we're effectively just a little over halfway through the process to bring in the additional 20,000 officers, and that is that's going incredibly well. I'm convinced that we will get the funding to do that.
Yes.
And then the question then becomes how much is there over and above that to do other things.
Yes.
So it is great that we're bringing those officers in. You know, it would be remiss of me not to say, of course, whilst this growth is welcomed, it is in a sense replacing the officers that we lost over the period of time of austerity. But you know, there's no point looking backwards. Let's look forward. It's a great opportunity for us to bring in new people into the organisation, and of course I'm heavily involved with the programme, the Police Uplift programme, and whilst we're bringing an additional 20,000 during that period of time, we'll probably bring in 50,000-60,000 people as we would normally be bringing them in. So for all those points we talked about legitimacy earlier, really good opportunity to increase the representation in that group of officers, and we're doing fantastically well at bringing more women in as officers. We're not doing as well at the moment in terms of minority ethnic recruits, but we're working really hard on that. So there's some good opportunities, but as you say, they are inexperienced officers, and so the work that I do along with colleagues with the government around what the performance mechanisms look like, what the governance arrangements are within government, so that we can make sure that what we're doing is prioritising, because it doesn't matter how much money we get given in policing, we are always going to have to prioritise.
Yes.
We are never going to have enough money to do every single thing that we might want to do.
Yes.
And so therefore we have to go through that process, and part of my challenge is how we do that effectively with the mechanisms that government have put in place to allow us to really be prioritising on those issues that are as most important to the public. And a lot of that is crime, obviously, and we need to recognise that. But we also have to manage the demand that comes into the service. And one of the areas that has particularly been apparent, particularly since we've emerged out of the worst of the pandemic, is increases in demand on our service, and often increases. We've always, I suppose, to some extent been the emergency service of last resort, but I think increasingly over the last number of years we've become the emergency service of first resort, and stepping into spaces where arguably other public services ought to be providing.
Yes, demand growing inexorably, not just in what I might term the real world.
Correct.
But also in the online world. Some real challenges there.
Yeah.
And behind the scenes, the back office demand, for example, on things like vetting.
Yep.
You know, any additional work on vetting itself requires more time.
There are very few things that we do that become less complex over time. Generally speaking, they become more complex. As you point out, the online element there, I mean, for me, that's a really key one, because you know, I often try and describe the kind of demand, and even if you stick to the crime demand, well, of course, unlike most other businesses will decide there's a new thing we need to be doing. So there's a new thing we need to be doing. So we will start doing this new thing, and we will stop doing some of the old thing. You know, if you think of a TV manufacturer, they will decide where the future of TVs is. They'll design them, they'll sell them, they'll stop making the old ones. The challenge for policing is there is an ever-increasing list of things that we need to do, as you say, the kind of cyber-enabled criminality, the digitally enabled. You know, we're probably all more vulnerable in the digital space than we are in the physical space to be victimised. So we're having to take all of those things on, which are complex. They require new skills, they require more skills, they require different partnerships. But at the same time, we are still the service that has to deal with the people who fight outside the pub, or punch their partner, or steal somebody's, you know, alloy wheels off their car. And so, you know, so that's the real challenge that we always face. And sort of part of my role, a large part of my role is being that kind of interface with government to make sure that that prioritisation is sensible and more importantly is achievable, because that's the really hard part. Because it's easy to continually give an ever-growing list of things we want the police to do, but we are still only using the resource that we've got.
There's so it's not just, if I may, an ever-growing list of demands on the police. There's also, I feel, an ever-increasing demand on the chair of the National Police Chiefs Council.
You could say
in that. Here in the UK, the policing governance is complex. It would challenge anybody, even those most expert in this field, to draw a picture that completely and utterly represented that.
Yeah, it's a spider's web rather than
so. And you have, in recent times, you've been chair now of the NPCC for 2.5 years.
Yeah.
And in that time had quite a number of very significant challenges. But
yes,
part of the challenge is in stakeholder management.
It is.
If I can put it that way. So how have you found that? How have you dealt with that? And do you think that things are going in the right direction or not on governance?
So I think you know, that in essence is my job, if you like, and how I would describe our organisation, NPCC, is not an organisation in the traditional sense. It's what I describe as a network organisation, and I kind of see us sitting at the middle of a spider's web, and we are trying to do what we do, which is really about how do we coordinate things as best we can, how do we get people to collaborate effectively, and then how do we communicate on behalf of the chief officers. That's my sort of mission. So it is challenging, but I guess the really important point is that structure, you know, messy as it is not going to change anytime soon. And I think there are good reasons why you wouldn't go into wholesale restructuring, because it's incredibly time-consuming, costly, diverting, etc. So sometimes people ask me the question and say, well, when is it going to change? When are we going to change this structure? And kind of where I am now is, having had these discussions personally with you know, with ministers, with Home Secretary, with Prime Minister, is it's not going to change. So it's the wrong question. The right question is, if this is the structure that we have, how do we make it work as effectively as we can for the public and as efficiently as we can, so that we're getting the most out of all the different, whether it's a police force, whether it's NPCC, whether it's the PCCs, whether it's Her Majesty's Inspectorate, or it's the College of Policing. All of these bits have to come together. So my role is, with all of those seniors in all of those entities, to be pulling those together and allowing us, so in the first instance, allowing us as the sector to operate as coherently as we possibly can, and then to be the interface along with some of those other seniors into government as well, to make sure that we are all, because I don't doubt, you know, government wants the same outcomes as we want. Yes. But of course, you know, they're in a different environment. They're in a political environment. Yes. They need to deliver what they need to deliver. And so what I'm detecting here is an acceptance that it's for politicians to determine big picture what the structure is, and then for policing to get on within that in making it work. Because that's kind of, if you wanted to come up with a how would you best describe what police do, it's kind of making it work is what we do. Whether that's suddenly having to deal with a worldwide pandemic that takes us into a place that we do, whether it's dealing with a new form of protest, whether it's, as we are today, there are thousands of officers from literally all over the country converging on Glasgow to police the climate summit, COP26 climate summit that's about to start in Glasgow. I mean, an enormous operation, but that's what we do. That's how we do. We make stuff work. We're in front of Buckingham Palace at the moment. It's a pretty recognisable international, I would have said structure. UK policing, in the wider sense, though, you know, does UK policing, to your knowledge, your instinct, here currently in London, do you think that UK policing still has a role to play in
in UK policing? Does it have as much influence as perhaps it might have had?
I think it does have influence, but there's no doubt in my mind that it could be greater, and that's a subject of discussion that I've been having with so Andy Marsh, who has just taken over as Chief Executive at the College of Policing.
Former Chief Constable of Avon and
Somerset and Hampshire.
Yes.
But you know, that's part of the discussions that Andy and I have been having, because I think there is. So I mean, first thing, as a senior UK police officer, I spend a lot of my time being quite roundly criticised in our own country about what we are or are not doing on the to the view of various commentators. Actually, I still think, and I think justifiably, the reputation of British policing around the world is incredibly strong and high, and therefore we should be exploiting that. We should not only exploiting it in a positive way, because I think there are things that we can teach and we can share, and
similarly vice versa.
We've learned lessons, and of course it's really important that we are taking those ideas from elsewhere as well. And there's a whole host of areas where we work really, you know, in and around serious and organised crime, in and around counter-terrorism, in and around a lot of the training that we take part in overseas, and others come and take part with us. So I think there's lots that goes on, but as with most things in life, there is more that we could do, and I think that, as I say, is a conversation since Andy took over a number of weeks ago. That's a conversation that we've been having, because it not only is really good from policing, but I think it fits. It also can be a really important part of the government's overarching strategy in terms of, you know, influence internationally and support internationally, to make sure that because of course, you know, we talked a little bit about how, you know, patterns of crime and challenges have changed. Well, one of the things that I would say has changed dramatically, probably even in the last 10 years, is the international nature of the crime that we're facing. The advances in technology that have affected all of our lives in every way obviously have presented opportunities to criminals and presented challenges to us. But the concept that you can just look and say, well, I'm going to just police in my county is completely outdated.
There are linkages there.
Absolutely.
Yes.
And you know, there are, you know, there will be criminality that will be taking place in countries all over the world that will affect people in this country. So we've got to be connected. We've got to be working with other countries, other police forces. And I have to say, and I would say, the experience that I've had over the last 2 years as we've worked our way through transition and into EU exit, the relationships that we have had as UK policing. So I've had responsibility for the International Crime Coordination Centre that we set up, that's still working in terms of EU exit. The relationship we have and the NCA have with all of our European partners, policing partners, is fantastic. And throughout all of that, wherever the political discussions were going, the bilateral relationships as police officers with our partners in European countries, and now more broadly, as we've really driven on work with Interpol in the last year or so, you know, is really encouraging. And it's amazing how almost anywhere internationally, very quickly you will find very common ground when you talk with other police officers in terms of the challenges that we face and how we have to go about doing what we do. And it's also, there will always be learning in both directions. So this is, you know, most definitely not, we can go and tell everyone how to do it, because that would never be where we start. There's great learning for both sides, and you know, you will always develop when you're having those conversations about common issues.
Martin, I suggest we just pause here at the side for a moment or two. I strongly suspect that my target of 30 minutes has been significantly exceeded. We'll check that in detail in a moment or two. I do want to close though. We started, prior to turning the camera on, we started with a photograph by a memorial to fallen officers.
Yeah.
You have recently taken on the chairmanship of a significant organisation. It's a bit of a tradition that in closing these Policing Friendship Tour conversations, that I ask the person I'm talking with about a favourite charity of yours. So I know when we spoke before you had one in mind.
Yeah.
Perhaps you'd say something
Yeah,
about
of
that.
course. So for me, that would be the Police Arboretum Memorial Trust. So as you say, there is a memorial to policing here in London that we were at earlier.
There'll be a photograph accompanying the article.
Which was great, and that's been here for some time. The one generated by Michael Winner, some will recognise the work that he has done around memorialising police officers who lost their lives. But we never had a national memorial. And really exciting, over the last number of years we've been trying to fundraise to create a national memorial, and we now have that fantastic memorial at the National Arboretum in the UK, which is in Staffordshire, which is an incredible place for anyone who gets the chance to go there. It's an amazing
Certainly
place.
is.
Excuse me. And we that was dedicated by Prince Charles a few months ago, and is a very fitting memorial to all those police officers over the hundreds of years since the service in its various guises has been in existence, have lost their lives. So that's fantastic. We are carrying on the fundraising, partly to make sure that we've got sufficient resources to maintain, because it's great having a fantastic statue there or memorial there, but of course that needs looking after forever. So we need that looking after, and then really excitingly also we're creating a digital memorial as well, working with some universities where the individual stories of officers that have lost their lives are told in a really kind of interesting digital way, so that it's accessible to everyone, because not everyone will be able to get to Staffordshire
Absolutely.
or get there regularly. So it allows people to go and look for individual stories and understand exactly what happened to that officer and the circumstances. So really
worthy
exciting.
charity.
Really exciting.
Martin, it's been an absolute pleasure walking with you here in St James's Park outside Buckingham Palace as well, very much in the centre here of London. Thank you so much for your time. Very, very best wishes for the continuation of your term as chair of the National Police Chiefs Council. I do hope that your time is a little calmer than it has been over the previous 2.5 years, pandemic and so much more. Thank you for your time, really appreciate it.
Pleasure, thank you.